Hello, adventurers. Today I want to talk to you about something that I think is sort of leading down the wrong path of Zenless on Zero. Sorry, leading Zenless on Zero down the wrong path. And that is, well, the current game state, at least in my opinion, the game's health overall. I think that the game does have positive qualities. I'm not here to say that the game has no positive qualities. But something that I've noticed, if you go to the Twitch space right now, the Zenless on Zero space is lacking by comparison. If you compare like first month releases and the hype behind the characters, I mean, we're getting releases of brand new characters, I feel like, much sooner. I mean, this is of course about a month into the release of Zenless on Zero, so I mean, maybe around the right time, or the same length of time. But we've had really a lackluster, or at least a sort of a downturn in the amount of people streaming in the Zenless on Zero space. Now, I've said this before, I don't want this to be misconstrued as a negative approach due to seasonal content. I think seasonal content is fine. I think any game that is a gacha or has seasonal content, there is naturally to be some ebbs and flows within the space. But a point that was actually brought up by mtashed not too long ago was that the reason for this is that the content within Zenless on Zero is just not content creator worthy. So what I mean by that is, outside of just normal pulls, I think there is an appeal when a character is first released, no matter what gacha it is, to have content centered around pulls. People like to see people get pulls, and people actually like to see people not get pulls. If you watch Tectone do his pulls during Changli, during that time, people were absolutely going crazy during that time. So I think that both positives and negatives can be good in the content creator space for that. What I'm talking about is, outside of those pulls, we're not really seeing Zenless on Zero hold on to content creators. And I think that's because a lot of these games that are losing content creators over time, I think there's not enough available content for content creators to actually have unique experiences or go over those unique experiences in a similar way to, say, maybe a story-based game or even a challenging game does. So something that, you know, a lot of gacha games have, especially towards endgame, is you'll see a lot of challenging content in the end game. And so in the end game, you'll find a lot of opportunities to play with your character or characters in a team setting that require you to like really rank everything to the max level and still like put 100% effort into clearing. Now, while I can't say per se that Zenless on Zero has content that's not clearable, I saw Mr. Pokey clear the content blindfolded, but I don't think that gachas can necessarily hold on to enough of the player base, because it is all ultimately clearable at a certain state. Now, I will say, if you're free to play, if you're clearing content that's still over leveled you, then there is still a challenge associated with it. However, I think that when it comes to challenging content, I don't think there's enough of it, or enough coordinated challenging content to where the whole community can get behind it and go, yes, this is a challenge. I want to see another streamer complete it because it was challenging for me, and I want to see it in the same way. A game that I played not too long ago, I did a genocide playthrough of Undertale, and it has one of the hardest boss fights in the game, and I cleared it in like 50 deaths. I have millions of views on TikTok just from that clear, because it is such a challenging play. And a lot of people could say the same for like their challenge runs of Dark Souls. I just don't think a gacha game could ever achieve that level of challenging content to be interesting, because I think it'll always be just accessible enough, because the nature of a gacha game is always going to be either accessible via pay or playtime. So you're either going to have enough of one of those two things to make it to where the challenge isn't as much of a challenge. So I don't think that there ever can be that type of thing. Now, the point that mtashed made was something along the line of like the quest or two slice of lifey. I don't necessarily think that's the case, because you have games like World of Warcraft that have very uninteresting dailies, but the dailies and the rewards you can get from certain mobs, world bosses, etc., are interesting to make it to where you could be doing something very unfun, but the reward system is very rewarding, so you're able to get something out of it. So I don't think that a boring or slice of life like cozy content, I don't necessarily think that's boring for content creators. But I do think that right now the reward system or the challenges within Zenless Zone Zero are just not very interesting, because there's not really a system in which you can complete content in a laid back kind of way, but still be rewarded handsomely for it. You know, like you're not being rewarded for unique or interesting things. Frankly, all of the content that you clear in gachas is very linear, in the sense that the loot tables don't change drastically. I mean, in this game, when you're completing the errands, really all you're getting from it different is maybe the amount that you get from the challenges. That's what varies. So like how much you get from each one it varies a bit, or maybe your pull luck does, but RNG only gets you so far. So I think right now, and this is just gachas in general, not just for Zenless Zone Zero, I think that the content isn't unique enough to have any uniquely defined user experiences, either by the gameplay or the reward system. Currently, a game like Dark Souls, how you complete the boss can vary drastically, and that's what makes the content interesting, even though you're getting the same rewards for the most part. And something like Zenless Zone Zero and a lot of gachas don't have anything like that. So my personal idea for this, I think would be interesting within the space, is to have boss content and unique drops, which can have unique loot tables. Say you find a certain mob, or you kill a certain mob that only appears in certain areas, or a certain boss that does have challenges but rewards you uniquely for it, meaning that maybe the rewards you get versus someone else's gets could be different. Or even if it's just cosmetics that you receive. I just think that right now there's not a lot of unique experience within gachas, but I think they're very much capable of doing so by simply having unique loot tables. Anybody who's played Classic WoW knows that your character is not going to look good, but getting Savage Gladiator's Chain is insane. It's insane. It's a lot of fun. Like I got my warrior in Classic WoW, cleared Molten Core, cleared AQ40, cleared Nax, and so clearing that content and getting the gearing in there feels so much more significant. And I don't think gachas are necessarily, like, they're becoming more and more like RPGs. Why don't we have unique gearing and unique experiences like an RPG? I've always advocated for multiplayer and raid dungeons and co-op dungeons and things like that, because I think it could offer unique experiences. I just don't know if they're like the servers are prepared to handle that, because a lot of people complain about multiplayer within gachas, but I think it could be a unique experience in the space. So right now, I think that's one thing that I think is holding back why the game simply just doesn't have a large viewer base on Twitch. The other thing I want to talk about within the space that I think that another content creator, Hex Juice, who I've been burning through her content in absolutely tons of amazing points within the gacha space. I think some of the best opinionated gacha streamers and content creators have amazing points, not just for the health of a particular game, but the health of gachas altogether. And a point that she made that I think was really good is that I think that tribalism is one of these things that prevents, like, connecting it to my prior point, I think that tribalism is one of those things that I think is preventing the overall growth of the game, because you have so many people who are advocating for the game's detriment because they refuse to admit fault within their own space. And so while a lot of people say you shouldn't compare this game, you shouldn't compare Zenless Zone Zero to Wuthering Waves, you shouldn't compare Wuthering Waves to Genshin Impact, I think that these things are natural in a competitive space because there is a competitive nature to these games. Even though there's not always multiplayer, all these games are competing for the biggest multiplayer of them all, and that is your time and attention. And I think while comparison is bad for your own mental health and your own self-growth, it's great for game health because we get to see versions of things that could work in another space, at least in a semi-adjacent way. Now, a lot of gacha games will have modes like the Simulated Universe, in AFK Journey, it's the Arcane Labyrinth, and they have these modes that semi-match modes, which we can kind of see like, oh, here's a version of the game we could see if it was this type of genre. But I don't think that gachas right now push enough into these separate game modes where we have actually interesting gameplay. An example of this that recently came out is with League. They recently came out with, I think, either like a roguelite version or like a Vampire Survivors-esque. I guess it's still like a roguelite, which has a completely separate game mode. And before then, it was team fight tactics with battle chess. So I think that there's so many game modes that we could fully flesh out within gachas. And I think they get boiled down to mini games, which don't have a lot of value or interest over the long term. But bringing it back to my first point, I think these things could be beneficial to Zenless Zone Zero and gachas as a whole for the content creators to be able to stream, to be able to have something that you could play actively or casually that is interesting and not just challenging, but also has value because you get unique experiences out of it. It's why games like even though you have games like Fall Guys and Rumble Club, etc., these games are competitive by nature, but they're interesting because how people react to them are different. And I think that gachas, at least in their story modes and the mini games, have very limited reactions, or at least they're pigeonholed into a very small, condensed form of content. And when content creators don't have a wide range of content to pull from and stream, it leaves a very little option for people to be able to play something interesting in the space. So I think that instead of going, my game is infallible, my game doesn't need to be fixed, games do not need to appeal to content creators, let's drop all this pride and embrace some humility so we can make some actual comparisons, so some of these extra game modes can be fleshed out in a positive way. People were dogging any game that has a fishing mode because they're like, fishing is like the worst of the worst. It's like the terrible trope within games that people absolutely can't stand. I love a fishing mode. I'd have a fishing mode. If you put a fishing competition, I'll be the first one to participate. I did the Booty Bay fishing competition, and I made sure that I did that first in any patch that I could, because there was always unique rewards that you could get, and you always had to be on top of your game, and anybody could win it. Anybody could put it in their hat, put in their bet, and win it. It's just a matter of effort and timing. So I think these are ideas that I don't want to force anybody to have to do, but I think what we have from the community is truly a lack of thinking about the game in the long term. So I think what a game like Zenless Zone Zero and a lot of gachas are missing right now is we don't have a lot of people thinking about the long-term health of the game and where the game needs to go a month, 2 months down the road. I think a game has so much opportunity for the game to have long-term health, but I think a lot of people just want to think about the short term and the short-term gratification, and then they wonder why their game is it goes up, it plateaus, and then it just sinks and then plateaus again. I think you want the game to be like this, and that's totally normal. But right now, I'm seeing a lot of gachas, whether it's Wuthering Waves, Zenless Zone Zero, AFK Journey, where it's just going up, plateaus, drops, plateaus again. and it could be lower than its prior plateau. And so I think when we think about these long term, it's just a lot better for the game overall. But hey, you know, I respect it. I respect it. You know, if you want to keep the gacha simple, I think that's totally fine. I don't think that these games need to be taken seriously, and I'm not saying these games need to be main gamed by anybody. But I am saying, overall, I think the health of a game like Zenless Zone Zero, it's beginning to make sense why there's so few people streaming it. Just, you know, what, less than a month after its release, and why a game like AFK Journey, you know, they're the worst of it. I mean, like, they have like less than 100 viewers on a great day. They have less than 100 viewers. But that being said, the YouTube space, these games are thriving and they're doing very well. So I think these games have enough notoriety to where people are watching them, but there's a reason why they're not being streamed. And I think streaming health cannot be ignored. It's something that can't be ignored in this space, because while like there will always be content on YouTube that'll get views, I think that having a streaming health within a game is also important as well. I don't know if there's any like notable data of like comparing stream health, like how many people are streaming it and people are viewing it, versus you know, like what looks like on the opposite end of things, where it's all on the YouTube space, and which one is better overall. But I feel like having a good mix of both, even if it's less so, is better than just having views on YouTube only. I mean, it's why we see drops on the Twitch space so often. I feel like it's important so we can recruit new and active players down the line. I hope this inspired some ideas for you. If you thought any of these ideas were good, or if there's any ideas that you think might contribute to the game's health overall in the streaming space, I'd love to hear it in the comments. If you haven't joined us and you haven't joined the Go-Getters, we are streaming Monday, Wednesday, Friday, playing Zenless Zone Zero, AFK Journey, and Honkai Star Rail is kind of like on the back burner, but I've been playing that in lieu of Wuthering Waves because I haven't really jumped back into Wuthering Waves yet. But I'd love to have you. But until next time, guys, I appreciate you, and may fortune favor your journey. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.